So we were talking about the element of translation. We brought up how the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the Jewish tradition works on pulling people in to the text rather than allowing the Torah to be unmoored from its original Hebrew words. Even our commentaries are designed to have conversation with the text, but translation, which allows an entity to be cloned and then go off the reservation, we did not want that to happen. So in general, this doesn't mean there aren't translations that exist. In general, it's very hard to find a Hebrew Bible that just has English or French or German. Traditionally, it's going to have the Hebrew together with other language, and most of the time there'll even be Rashi on the bottom, and the Onkelos, the Aramaic translation. Almost any Chumash will not just give you the translation, and that's what we supposed to translate. But translation is not the only commentary of the Torah in the early years. In other words, the translation does do some commentary, because it has to, because every translation is an interpretation. But there's another old form of rabbinic learning called Midrash. And that's what we're going to explore today. Midrash, though, is not just one type of literature. It's both a genre and a method of study. In other words, it's a library of its own, which we're going to explore, but it's also a method of study. So let's take a quick look. Let's see here if we can, let me get this going here since it looks like everyone's here. Okay, so I'm just gonna shrink that screen for a moment. Okay, so the Midrash lesson 2. Now, one element that we have to talk about a little bit more is the relationship between a written Torah and an oral Torah. We did not really talk about it last week as much as we should have. So we are gonna go back into lesson 1 as well in the textbook. Okay, in the timeline showing up on your screen is on the left, and if you have the book, it's your map, you have the map. So on the left of the map is the Tanakh, the 24 books of the Torah, which, as you can see from the timeline, is where it runs from. So, but the areas we're going to explore today is the Midrashic works, which are the red line on top. And these extend for about 700 years. From about the year 200, the sages exist from the year 200 to about 550, 600, the ones quoted, but the works themselves can be compiled all the way until the early medieval period, 1200s. In other words, because it's an oral tradition, a lot of times there were collections of manuscripts that people put together and then made books out of them, or made manuscript collections out of disparate teachings. So what you have is the rabbis of the Midrash, the sages of the Midrash, the composers, if you will, are from the Mishnah period and the Talmud period, which is from 100 BC till 200 of the Common Era. That's Mishnah. 200 to 500 is Talmud, with another 100 years of editing, year 600. In a Midrash, even if a Midrash was first put together in the year 1000, the rabbis and sages quoted in it are only from the Mishnah and the Talmud. We don't really call Midrash anything other than the creation of the Mishnah and Talmudic sages. So what happened is Shalom Pinchas. This is a very important thing. In other words, people think, oh, I'm making up Midrash. We stopped making Midrash in the year 500. We did not stop making collections of the Midrash because there were many manuscripts, many traditions, but every rabbi quoted is going to be from those periods. What we call the Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, or Razal, our rabbis of blessed memory. These are the people who are the carriers of what we call the oral tradition. Everything else is commentary, so to speak. we are going to find that we view what we produce as Torah too, but when we use Midrashic technique, we call it a drash. We won't call it Midrash, because Midrash has become a genre of learning. If anyone wants to interject, please do, because I'm just throwing out some concepts so we can even jump in to be able to have a framework for this. So this is an important element. There's works called Midrash, and there's going to be a technique called Midrash. Yes, Mayor.
So, with respect, Rabbi, in the Midrashic, the red line,
Right.
We refer to that as the Midrashic era?
So the Midrashic era is, if you look at the shaded box, that's when the people existed. In other words, they owned the Talmud and the Mishnah and the rabbis of the Midrash exist in that year 100 BC till 500 of the Common Era. That's a shaded gray box, but their works are not necessarily edited until later, which it makes for all sorts of interesting issues, because a book can be edited and you don't know, okay, who chose what? Why is it ordered the way it is? How much did the editor have to do with the way conversations are linked? That is an important element. Another element we're going to say, when someone says the Midrash says, it's absurd. There is no the Midrash. There are many collections of Midrashim.
That's what I was trying to get at.
Yes.
You used the expression elders a moment ago.
Yes.
Who are the elders to the Midrashic rabbis?
So the Midrashic rabbis say the men of the great assembly, like the beginning of Ethics of Our Fathers, were Ezra, Nehemiah, and the last of them we read in the first Mishnah of Ethics of Our Fathers was Shimon. Shimon was from the last of the men of the great assembly. It had three things: make them. So we have this idea of the end of the men of the great assembly, beginning the period of the sages. Now, realistically, the Second Temple period, you have what we call the end of the prophets, which are the men of the great assembly. That's the top end: Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, even Mordechai and Esther. And then you have the Maccabee Hanukkah story, but the sages that then come up are called the Zugos, the peers. And then we have, by name, we have certain names that we read in Ethics of Our Fathers, the first Mishnahs. And then we end up with Hillel and Shammai and all these people from 100 to 200 of the Common Era.
No women?
No, so you have women who were sages, as we're going to see, but in general, the high court was male, the rabbinic assembly was male, without question, like the rest of the world. So a convert, a ger could join as well. So a matter of fact, there's two of the greatest leaders of the Jewish community were Shmai and Avtalion. They were both converts. Rabbi Kiva's father was a convert. So in other words, we don't have, Rabbi Meir was from converts, from some really nasty people in history. So, anyway, coming back full circle, I think there's an important element here just to touch on about who these sages were. The view of these sages, and you read the Talmudic stories, we see them as being very holy individuals, as well as very studious and very wise. So there is an element that does come into play about how we treat their writing and how we treat them as well, as we're going to see. Okay, so I was saying, when you say the Midrash says, it is a challenge because it's collection, and some of them have greater legitimacy than others. For example, the Talmud quotes many Midrashic teachings, and therefore it is a repository of the stories of the Torah, interpretations of the Torah. It will have a greater legitimacy than other collections of Midrash. Why will it have that greater legitimacy? It will have that greater legitimacy because it was part and parcel of the discourse of every Jew over 2,000 years, and most importantly, in the earliest stages, everyone saw it, everyone dealt with it. If there was a contradiction or a bad text, it was fixed, as opposed to a Midrashic writing that comes up in the year 1000 that somebody collected, a wonderful scribe. And we don't see it it shows up for 100 years and people stop copying it. And now someone discovers it in a library in Oxford or in Cambridge. It doesn't have the same type of legitimacy as far as this text, because these were oral traditions that end up being filtered through the study of it and the engagement with it and the comparison to other texts. Just because it's old, this is an important element when you find artifacts, doesn't make it better. You know, when we were talking last week about written Torah scrolls, there were people who were writing Torah scrolls who were not very talented, and you may end up with the oldest Torah scroll full of mistakes. The Dead Sea Scroll, for example, is the Isaiah scroll. According to many experts, there were things that were just sloppy writing, because if you're a copyist from a manuscript, there are all sorts of mistakes that can happen, which is why last week we spoke about a very sophisticated system of checking every word of a Torah. My point is, just because something's old doesn't make it great. And matter of fact, we would say the fact that it was part of our system that gives it a greater legitimacy. This is important more for historical questions like finding Dead Sea Scrolls or other artifacts. What makes them, what is their status, so to speak, in Judaism? And for sure, later discoveries. Okay, yes. No, you.
So do we know the names of any of the contributors?
You know all their names. We have 40 generations we're going to see of every single one, from Moses down to the codifiers of the Talmud. It's 40 generations, and we know their names of the leaders of each one. Plus, we know hundreds. We have hundreds of names in the Talmud and Mishnah and Midrash who they were. Now, in other words, here's the thing. In general, Judaism's creation of literature was a group effort. There were not authors. There were schools. Mishnah was not just Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. Rabbi Akiva had a school. Rabbi Yishmael had a school. They collected this stuff. Not one, but many. Then they got together and they edited it. And the same thing with the Talmud. You have a redactor, but ultimately, and redactors in each one of these cases, but ultimately it's a group effort. The hubris of saying, I wrote a book, doesn't start until post-Talmudic period. Even ones that are named after certain rabbis are full of quotes from other people. And that is a central theme in Judaism. You want to show how it came from others. Oh, here was the important point I wanted to say. You had asked earlier about names. Someone else had said something else before names, but related to it. Until there was argument in the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral tradition, we're going to talk about when debate begins. But until debate breaks out, which we consider to be a problem, in other words, there used to be a high court and they would resolve all problems, and debates did not then snowball. So there is a certain period where we start naming individuals because their individual opinions all of a sudden start mattering. When there was a Supreme Court, you weren't, and there was a majority rule, you weren't allowed to say, I held differently. We don't publish minority opinions in Judaism when it was a court decision. We'll talk about the Mishnah. A court decision, they did not publish minority opinions. And there was a consensus or a decision was made and we moved on. It was only when arguments and debate begins that people begin standing out as individuals. And this period is called the Zugot. It's the period of about 250 BC, and it leads to 100 BC with the beginning of the Mishnaic sages, who are their descendants, if you will. Okay, let's jump in. Take a look for a moment on the screen. Here it may be in the textbook too, but major midrashic work. Is it there in the textbook?
Yeah.
Let's see if Pinchas can find it. He thinks it's there.
Pinchas is amazing.
There he is, very good. It's in the textbook too.
54.
In 54, or you can watch on the screen, whatever's easier for you.
These are biblical commentaries. So.
Oh, sorry, no, okay, so look on the screen. It should be in the book too, but
62.
62 in the book or on the screen. There are two different genres of Midrash. One is legal, figuring out what a law is based on a biblical text. And the other is going to be exegesis as far as the non-legal. In other words, anything to do with philosophy, legends, biblical interpretation, tales of the sages, all those things are called Midrash. They are called Agadic Midrash. Let's try to remember this word, Agadah, like your Passover Haggadah. Your Passover Haggadah is a form of Midrash. It is a Midrash. We're going to look at it for one of them. It uses all the techniques of Midrash, parts of it are ritual. It's both a prayer book and acts of Midrash. That's what the Haggadah is. And it comes from the same word, Agadah, Haggadah. They're all related to each other. So you have the non-legal and then you have the legal. There are different rules associated with the legal elements and the non-legal elements. So they're both called Midrash, and there are some works that focus more on the legal and other works that focus more on the non-legal, the Agadic. The problem is they all have elements of both mixed into each other. So therefore, as a genre, you have some that are called halachic midrash, which means 90% legal, 10% stories. Then you have, like Genesis doesn't have many laws. So the Midrash Rabbah on Genesis, which is one of the early Midrashim, is mostly stories. Once in a while, there'll be a legal element that'll be stuck in. But legal and Agadic are different, just like the relationship between, we studied last week, the 5 books of Moses and the prophets and writing. The 5 books of Moses is a source of law. The Navi, the prophets and the writings are a source of inspiration, a source of philosophy, a source of pushing people in the right direction, moral cheerleaders, if you will, for the people. That's exactly what the Agadah is as well. In other words, what the prophets are to the Chumash, to the 5 books of Moses, the Agadah is to the Halacha, the stories, the exegesis of the inspiration is to the legal. You know, an interesting thing, which I haven't found a source for it, but let me just play the difference. Those of you who are more musically inclined, maybe will see this. Tell me if you hear. Maybe I'll ask you guys the question. This is from this week's Torah portion, and this is the Torah reading, and it's read as a trainer on our website. So if anyone ever wants to learn how to read a Torah portion, you can go to our website. But take a look. Listen for a moment.
Adonai el Moshe bo el Paro ki ani ichbadati et libo ve'et lev avadav leman shiti ototai ele bikirbo.
Okay, we're reading a narrative part of the Torah, the story of Exodus. God tells Moshe, come to Paro because I've hardened his heart in order that I should be able to place my miracles and wonders in him. Now let's hear how the Haftorah sounds.
Hadavar asher diber Adonai el Yirmiyahu Hanavi lavo Nebuchadrezzar melech Bavel lehakot et eretz Mitzrayim.
What's the difference between these two tunes, Pinchas? How would you describe it musically, difference?
I'm not sure I could describe it, but they're clearly different.
Okay.
Clearly.
So the difference, one could say, is again, I've seen it written. I don't have a great source for this, but it makes sense to me. So I want to share it because it resonated. The prophets is much more poetic as opposed to the Chumash, which is much more truncated, especially if you're reading it quickly, because there's an expression of poetry, of soul versus law. The tune is different. How, in other words, the tune expresses, they would say about the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, he would always hum when he studied. How he was humming, you could tell what he was reading. because you could tell what he was thinking about based on his tune. If it was introspective, if it was joyous, if it was movement, you could tell what subject. And he had a massive library and he was a massive studier. The point is, there's a tune. As a matter of fact, there's a tune how you learn Gemara. And this ancient tune, just by the way, is called the Gemara tune. Is many people do the Manish Tana in this tune. Tatech v'badir fragin fear kashes. Manish Tana lailazem mikol haleilas. Vos is anish nach from Pesach. So this is in Yiddish, but this is how they would. This tune seems to be like a tune people would have when they're in Gemara. When you hear a Hasidic discourse, there's a different tune. When a Rebbe would say one. In other words, there is this element of the expression of the text being expressed in the very tune of it. So the Agadah would be more like the Haftorah. It would be more soulful, more poetry. It's more, not everything is literal. And here's a very important thing. Midrash does not always have to be taken literally, but it must be taken seriously. Literal and serious are not the same thing, because if you're talking poetry, if you take it literally, you're misunderstanding the point. The problem of Midrash, and I'm saying this is a problem, and people are butting heads and trying to pull out, you don't know what's what always. You can have a part of Midrash that is a biblical interpretation. You can have a part of Midrash that's a story. You could have another one that's a sermon linking what's happening in their time with the Romans attacking them to what happened with Esau and Yaakov. You don't always know what the original intent was. We believe it's all worthy of study, all have layers of meaning. It's, so to speak, enveloped into the Torah, but it's not always easy to separate the strands. And we will talk about this issue as we get further into it. But Agadic Midrash, Agadah, it's not always simple. It is the greatest repository of interpretations of the Torah, but some of them are taking it out of context in order to teach us moral and ethical lessons. So we're going to come back to that. All right. So this screen is small to begin with, but I'll send you one. Okay. Just these are areas which I don't know if we covered. So I want to just go through this. Let me make sure I can see everyone's faces now. Okay. So if anyone has a question, please, raise your hand. The necessity of an oral Torah is the written Torah does not explain well enough what the words mean, that we cannot do it without an explanation. I'm just going to give a few classical explanations that people are all familiar with. Yom Kippur, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah you should fast. It says, Ta'anu, v'inisem, you shall afflict yourself. It doesn't say fast. This word means torture, torment, afflict. It doesn't mean necessarily fast. It's only an oral tradition that can tell you that. The 5 books of Moses cannot tell us the details. It doesn't tell us the details of how to do things. Another one, kosher slaughter. God says in the Torah that if you're not in the temple and you're not in the desert and you want to eat meat, you could eat meat and you should slaughter it like I have commanded you. Kosher, everyone knows what kosher is. There are laws of slaughtering an animal, like I commanded you. Where did you command me? It's nowhere in the Torah. It doesn't tell us how to do this detail. I mean, it's like the most fundamental Jewish thing for a community that you need to have an expert do is slaughter. How is it done? And there are rules for it. But where are those rules? Not in the written Torah. There has to be some other information that comes along with it. Tefillin and mezuzah, you should bind them as a sign upon your hand. They should be totafot. We don't even know what totafot means. We translate it as ornaments. That's a translation. Totafot is a strange word. Nowhere else in the Torah and Tanakh is it used. Some even say it's not even Hebrew. It came in from an African language.
I read it today. It was translated as tefillin.
Tefillin. Who decided? Not in the written Torah. Write them on the doorposts of your house. What does that mean? Write what? Well, who's deciding? Just everyone should go and do graffiti? I mean, one could say that's what it means. Everyone should do what they want. But if you believe that Torah had opinions and laws, and it wasn't just a hodgepodge, so there has to be a way So there's no question from a traditional Jewish point of view, there was an oral tradition. How big this oral tradition is and how narrow it is, we can debate. But there has to be an oral tradition if you believe the Torah is from God. If you believe it's a hodgepodge, there's nothing to talk about. Then we're not analyzing this. Traditional Jews believed it was from God, and they needed an oral tradition for it to make sense, so to speak. And they believed there was one. Okay, let's do one more. Tefillin, this is discovered tefillin from 2,000 years ago. If you take a look at the bottom left corner, the separate portions are supposed to be wrapped with animal gut in a certain way. It's the same thing. It's what we have, the same portions. They discovered some more recently, but they've discovered about 24 tefillin fragments there. This is before the Mishnah was written. In other words, here's the issue. People will say, oh, after the Mishnah Talmud was written, then you have Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism existed. When we say Rabbinic Judaism, it means a traditional interpretation of the biblical text that meant specific things, like tefillin means something, ritual slaughter means something. Jews were always doing it from their perspective, they've always been doing it. This is what the tradition means. Now, can I prove that? No, I can't prove it. I could just say is that that's what they felt then in the year 200 BC, 300 BC, that we have been always doing this from Moshe. And there's a lot of other reasons why one could make that argument, but I'm not here for the debate. I'm just giving the perspective. So here's an interesting one. You know, in when Masada was being excavated by Yigal Yadin, so these rabbis from Yerushalayim showed up going up the snake path in the middle of the day. That was the snake path is not easy going in the middle of the day. And they came straight in. They didn't want to see anything else. They wanted to check out the mikvah. What's interesting about mikvah is you don't have Talmud on it. You have Mishnah on it. So the laws that developed over time, a lot of it was based on these traditional understandings from the Mishnah. And there are all sorts of rules, how the water has to flow in, what size it has to be, all not in the biblical text. It is all from oral tradition. Here they found a mikvah. These guys went in and he jumps in with his measuring tape and he's measuring the angles and checking everything. He goes, this is amazing. This is like a mikvah you would get today in Yerushalayim. From 2,000 years ago, by now they've uncovered many, many more mikvahs from even before. In other words, mikvahs were being made across Israel according to rabbinic understanding of what a mikvah is. The biblical text says nothing. It says you should wash your flesh. It doesn't say immerse yourself in a mikvah. Even the word mikvah, but everything about mikvah are from rabbinic understandings of what it means to purify yourself. In other words, there is no biblical text that can tell you this stuff. Judaism is rabbinic Judaism. There were periods where the Sadducees tried to fight against it and they wanted to make their own interpretation and they wanted to push out. Later on, the Karaites, early Christians or others, there was an attempt. But Judaism, the traditional approach, this is the chain. The sages of Talmud or Judaism, they accepted from the prophets and it was led down to them. This is how it was seen and this is how they study it. And this is what our ancestors for the last 2,000 years, for sure, were engaged in. Okay, so there are biblical texts, which again, a biblical text you could interpret many different ways. I just want to show you a few. There are biblical texts that refer to an oral Torah. Again, interpretation, anyone could translate things any way they want. But I would just say, these are the Chukim Mishpatim and the Toros that God gave the Har Sinai in the hands of Moshe. Toros, plural. Then you have God says to Moshe, or rather Moshe is repeating, and to the Jewish people, verse 13, on Mount Sinai, he told you his covenant, and he wrote the 10 commandments into stone tablets, and he commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and ordinances, so you should do them in the land. Nothing about writing, about teaching them. So now this is an important element that came up in the last class, in our Word is Edge class. There is what came first, the written Torah or the oral Torah? According to tradition, Moshe writes down the Torah scrolls before he dies, which is the 40th year in the desert. It is possible he wrote down scrolls as they happened in Genesis and Exodus. He wrote down after he came down from the mountain. But when did he teach them about all the laws that are in Deuteronomy? When did he teach them all the laws of Leviticus? So the understanding basically is that Moshe first teaches the people laws, and then they get the scroll. So here's the paradox. The oral Torah comes before the written Torah. You should take a little of an asterisk. They had to be told they didn't have the scrolls. The 40 years in the desert that they spent in this yeshiva. This was a good yeshiva. 38 years. There's clouds of glory. There's manna. There's lovely Miriam's well, providing for everyone to study. They're learning the Torah. This is what they're doing for 38 years. Their conflict is only they're getting into trouble. All the biblical stories of trouble is the first year and a half, first 2 years. After that. After the first 2 years, it's already, that's it. There's no more conversation. They're studying what Moshe is teaching them, according to our tradition. That's what's taking place. But the point is, what comes first? What comes first is seen as the teaching, the laws. If the Torah, as you read it, is full of laws, how to keep them is important. So you need an interpretation. But to transmit it is the question. How is it transmitted? And also, how do you end up with new applications of law? That becomes a question as well. Okay, so here's a very important biblical verse, which, you find this with Jethro. You find this with Jethro as well. Jethro tells Moshe, you're standing day and night, all day long, answering people's questions. What are you answering? What is he answering? It's not just little squabbles. They have questions about Jewish law. What is going on here? So he says, delegate, set up different 10s and 50s and 100s. So you have this idea of court systems or of some form of mentorship and then judges of some sort. But here we have in the biblical text a system of law. If you don't know, if matter eludes you in judgment, blood and blood, judgment and judgment, legion, borders dispute your cities. We already said every city has to have their own court. You have to have a court. So what are we talking about? If the courts, the 23 judges in a city could not decide what the law is, they would go to the high court in Jerusalem at the Temple Mount. So there was a high court, and God is saying you should go to the Levite or the Levitic Kohanim and to the judge. You'll be in those days. And you shall inquire, and they'll tell you words of judgment. And you should do according to the word they tell you. You should observe everything they instruct you. According to the law they instruct you, where the judgment they say you should do, don't divert, not right or left. In other words, is this authority given to the high court and the sages? It does exist. And this is how traditional Judaism sees what was going on in that time and afterwards as well. Okay. Let's see if we can. Okay. So the question is, what is the nature of the divine law? Let's open up our textbook to class 1, text 10. So this is class 1, text 10. It is, oh, maybe I missed one. No, not 10. Let's do, I'm sorry, I must have missed one. Yeah, let's do lesson 1, text 6.
Lesson 1.
Page 12.
Oh,
We're going to skip around a drop just to cover a few little things that we may not have had. So this is page 12. Would you read for us, Susan? Text 6.
Yes. It's an active origin of Torah. Scripture, Mishnah, Talmud, and Agadah. Even what a proficient student is tested. It already says Moses.
This is a very radical statement. It's saying scripture, Mishnah, Agadah, things that were created over 1,000 years were said to Moses. What does that mean? What does that mean? It's over the top. So there are other quotes. There's two approaches, two primary approaches. There's more than one, but two primary approaches. One approach is Moses, for 40 years, conveys the basic interpretations of the mitzvot. What is an esrog? What is a lulav? How do you slaughter? But for all future things, the development of the Jewish library, the excavation of text to create more text and ideas, he gave to Moshe principles of interpretation and the biblical text that you could then apply the principles of interpretation to decode the text. So in other words, together with the written Torah and the oral tradition telling you the laws, there's an oral tradition of interpretation and methodology and even logic and reason and other types of natural ability of people to analyze the text that are ways to find meaning in the text. And the Torah tells us when there'll be a debate, if you follow those rules, you should follow the majority. So what is God's will? God's will is going to be what you use these tools to figure out a conclusion. And then if there's a debate, you follow the majority. That's God's will. So that's one approach. There is another approach, a little more mystical, that says Moses was a prophet and he had a vision. He had a vision above time of all that would be. And there are texts that imply this too. So it wasn't understanding, it was uploaded into his hard drive, if you will. But the idea that he has a glimpse for a moment into the eternity of the Jewish people. Now, maybe not a moment, maybe 40 days and 40 nights. It's being, uploaded into his mind. Now, it doesn't mean he conveyed it all. It comes back to the same issue. He doesn't convey it all. He conveys a system of interpretation that will sometimes lead to disagreement, like we have in the Talmud. Disagreement is okay because God's will is not that there should be only one uniform way of behavior, but rather we should be partners with God in determining it. Now, here's a classical reading, a classical understanding. I didn't want to read it, but it's such a good one. So those who missed it in our earlier classes can enjoy it. Text number 7, Mayor, would you read it for us? This is page 13. Would you read, Mayor? Thank you.
On that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought them all sorts of proofs, but they were rejected.
They're arguing about a certain type of oven, if it's considered a completed vessel or not for laws of purity. It was made like cinder blocks with sand in between, so it wasn't cemented together, but it worked as a stove. So is this a vessel or is it a pile of sand and dirt? That was the debate, and he's trying to prove his point. Mayor.
If the laws, I say, this water channel will prove it. Water channel began, flowing back. Said they to him, one does not cite halakhic proof from the water channel. Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the law is as I say, the walls of the study hall will prove it. Also the study hall rewritten in the fall. Rabbi Yehoshua scolded the walls. The Torah scholars are contending with each other on matters of Torah law. What is the nature of your involvement? Walls did not fall. Out of deference to Rabbi
Joshua.
Oh, Joshua. Thank you. Neither did they straighten out of deference to Rabbi Eliezer, but they still remain leading.
So in other words, when this text was written down or transcribed or recorded, they still had the leaning towers of the synagogue study hall, that the walls were half inclined in. They said, this is a remnant of this conversation. People would walk by and point out, okay, the 7 wonders of the world. So what happened?
Rabbi Eliezer then said to them, if the laws, as I say, let it be proven from heaven, there then issued a heavenly voice which proclaimed, what do you want of Rabbi Eliezer? The law is as he said.
A heavenly voice comes forth and says, why are you messing with Rabbi Eliezer? The law is like him. What happens next? Read a little bit louder so others can hear, because I'm not sure.
I don't have the drama.
Okay.
Rabbi Joshua stood on his feet and said, the Torah is not in heaven.
Okay, he's fighting with a voice from heaven. Okay.
What is the meaning of the statement, it is not in heaven? Said Rabbi, another one is coming. Jeremiah.
Like Jeremiah.
Jeremiah. As the Torah has already been given in Mount Sinai, we take no notice of heavenly voices, for you, God, have already written in the Torah at Mount Sinai, follow the majority.
And the rest of the story is, years later or a while later, Elijah the prophet meets one of the Talmudic sages, and the Talmudic sage says, what did God do at that time? He said, God laughed and said, my children have been victorious over me. My children have been victorious over me. I say, follow Rabbi Eliezer. And they said, no. They said, no, we're going to follow the majority like you yourself, God said. The understanding of this is we do not listen to a voice from heaven, an echo from heaven. We don't listen to prophets when it comes to deciding law. Prophecy is not the way. A sage, a wise person, and the debate of the study hall and coming to that logical conclusion is the will of God. That is the belief system of how rabbinic Judaism develops and doesn't allow charlatans and prophets and seers to change the religion, or it would have changed a multitude of times. You know, if you were to follow Jesus, Muhammad, or anyone else who claimed to see a vision and change the Torah, we didn't. We didn't, because you can have prophets and seers. We are okay with them. We're okay with prophets and seers, but they can't change Torah. The only way to change Torah is through legislation or debate with the sages of the Sanhedrin, of the men of the greatest of the high court. That's the way it's done. Okay, so let's skip text 8 and let us skip text 9. You can read them on your own. They're all good. They're all good texts to read. Okay. So we had here, so I'm just sharing the screen for a minute as we do a little review. We said the scripture, Talmud, Mishnah, Talmud, even a proficient student is destined to innovate, was said at Moses at Sinai. And we explained this means that the principles are given, plus the basic laws are done. So the relationship between a written Torah and an oral Torah is our question. I'm not going to read text 10. I just want to paraphrase it. Paraphrase it is I was once walking along the way, says this rabbi. This is text 10 on page 19. And I met someone who was a master of scripture. He knew Tanakh, but he did not know Mishnah. He said to me, Master, Tanakh was given to us at Mount Sinai. Mishnah was not. He said, both scripture and Mishnah comes from the mouth of the mighty. What's the difference? Let me tell you a story. A king had 2 servants. He gave wheat to one and wheat to another. And he also gave each one a bundle of flax. The wise one took the flax and made linen out of it and made a wonderful, beautiful tablecloth. Then he took the wheat and made flour and baked bread and made a beautiful bread, while the foolish servant did nothing. When the king arrives in his palace, he says, Kinderlach, give to me back to me what I gave you. The first one brought out the bread on a table with a beautiful cloth, and the other brought out the wheat in a box and a bundle of flax. Now, which of the servants is more precious? The Almighty gave the people of Israel, gave us wheat from which to make fine flour, and his flax from which to weave a cloth. This idea that Torah is meant to be developed by the Jewish people. It's not meant to be preserved in amber. Don't be afraid. Put it behind. The saddest thing is when you see a Torah scroll in a museum. What's it doing in a museum behind glass doors? Torah scroll has to be used in a synagogue. Books have to be used and written, not memorialized as a museum. Has to be something real that is part of our life and we're engaged in. And we're saying here, we make it grow. The Jewish people are the womb of Torah, that what happens is you take the biblical Tanakh and the Jewish people digest it, transform it, and give birth to many beautiful works that are based on it, linked on it, with differing views of differing levels of authority, but still all linked to the DNA, the original DNA of the Torah. Because God wants us to use our mind, and God wants us to have that level of partnership. Okay, let's take a look here. So if the oral Torah was given much after Sinai, so how do we say, in other words, it develops. So how do we say that it was given at Sinai if it develops over even the Mishnah by the year 200, and then the Talmud by the year 500? So we understand Torah law that regardless of heaven's perspective, its decision is defined by mortal human beings. Even if we're fallible, even if we can make a mistake, God's will is that that fallible human being should make that decision. And that's his will. His will is what we decided based on the logic and rules and reasons and the system that he created. Okay.
It's
So
really trusting a decentralized system.
well, it's not decentralized because ultimately for it to be binding on the Jewish people, there has to be a high court. There has to be, without a high court.
Those are 71 people.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it's not decentralized in that sense, which is why the close, so to speak, of new law in a way that's binding on the Jewish people, we're going to see ends up being the close of the Talmud pretty much. In other words, there is decentralization that we love as Americans, I think, post the Talmud. We still always come back to the Talmud, as we're going to see when it comes to law. But there is tremendous decentralization when it comes to what does a Torah text mean to me at this moment in my time, or a system of interpretation. This does not mean a free-for-all, but it means you get to strive according to the best of your ability to be able to understand and apply these texts. So that's what we will have to come back to, that sort of balance. So we have a contradiction on one hand. We say everything that a young student will innovate was already given at Sinai. If he's innovating, then it wasn't given. If it was given, he's not innovating. So we view it as everything is created with an original source and requires a special environment to develop and grow. So the Torah is a product of a partnership of divine revelation and human intellectual toil. God desired that Torah be the product of that partnership, and the oral Torah is God's way of incorporating us as an integral part of the process of creation. So every part of Torah is every part, has different levels of collaboration, divine revelation, human intellect. This is a little bit mind-blowing, this one, and it may be a bit much, but I feel I have to put it in here in a moment. Written Torah is divine revelation is more dominant. Human involvement is secondary. We have to read it. We have to keep the vowels. We have to write it correctly. So pronunciation, all that. The oral Torah, we have the ability to expound and articulate his wisdom and will using methods of interpretation. So written Torah, since the wording is divinely communicated, so we have to analyze it to understand the underlying meaning. The oral Torah stays in oral communication where the content is more significant than the wording, which is why reading number 11, Pinchas. Would you read for us on page 21?
With written Torah, a person says that the blessing on the Torah says the blessing on the Torah when they read it, even if they don't understand what they're saying. With the oral Torah, however, a person cannot say the blessing unless they understand what they're saying. For as regards the oral Torah, learning entails human understanding.
So when you pulled up for the Torah reading in your synagogue, you're allowed to make a blessing even if you have no idea what it is, because you have no idea what you're reading. Because the blessing is not on just the understanding, but is a component of written Torah that has value, which are the letters and the words and the sounds. If you can hear that, then you can make the blessing, or if you could read it or see it, because that's what the core is. The oral Torah, Talmud and Mishnah, if you're reading it, you don't understand it, you're not doing anything, because it's all about understanding. It happens to be because of different reasons. In the year 200, they decided to write it down, but its integral role is to be ideas and concepts. To put it a little more mystically, the oral Torah, you become the scroll. You become the scroll in which God's wisdom is inscribed. You are now not just a partner in Torah, you are a piece of Torah, so to speak, walking through. When you read and study something, it becomes one with your mind. By very definition now, you take it with you wherever you go. And not just that, it changes your brain. Everything you learn changes you in some way. So the written Torah has to be taught through the original text. Now, this is going to be a little bit complicated, and I'll email a link to this as well, but it's okay if you don't see it. I just want it to be up there. Basically, every part of Torah has different levels of partnership of God and man. So, for example, at the Ten Commandments, they hear God talking to them directly. They hear it. That is very much God is present in their life. For the other commandments, the rest of the stories of the Torah, Moshe is telling them, but God is talking directly to Moshe. So there's, again, a level of God, maybe a little bit less. So take a look. Let's go through this on the left. If you look at the 5 books of Moses, which of the 5 books, I'm opening this up, which of the 5 books is most human partnership in the creation of it? Not the stories, that would be Genesis, but which book is seemingly less God talking and more a person talking of the 5 books? So in the 5 books, the one Deuteronomy, which is the last 37 days of Moshe's life, Moshe gives over a recap of everything that happened. And I said this and I said that. It's Moshe talking. So we understand that God later on tells Moshe, write down these words. I transcribed it. I was your shorthand writer, so you can go and write this down. Write down this text. So so in the 5 books, the giver is more present in the first 4 books, and the recipient is more in the book of Devarim. How about the oral law? Take a look at the oral law. So again, it's more recipient, right? Because concepts can evolve and change. But there are 2 types of laws, 2 primary types of laws. There are those that we say are received laws, like what is a lulav? What is an esrog? So even though it's not written down, not dictated, and the human being has to remember it and transmit it to the next generation, so it is of the receiver, but it's still more giver. But how about derived laws? When the rabbis take principles of interpretation, the high court, and they come up with a new ruling, heart transplants. Who knew? Power of meat, lab meat, whatever it is, using the logic and reason that God gave us, that's more the recipient. Now, if you take a look at mitzvot, we won't go further, mitzvot. So mitzvahs are God talking to man for us to carry out his will. So it depends. In other words, we just do one of them. So if you think about it, if you're thinking about more about God, is that God wants me to do it. In other words, God commanded it, I should do it. If it's more about me, so then what's the benefit of it? How does it change me? What's my intent when I'm doing this, etc.? Every part of Torah can be split into 2, giver and receiver, because everything is a partnership. I'm going to see someone ask the question in the chat. Very good. Henry Reznikoff has a question. That's an important question. A matter of fact, I was going to say it, but if you look at the biblical text in the 10 Commandments, it first says, I am the Lord your God in the first 2 commandments, but then afterwards it starts saying, the Lord your God, you shall not curse. Because the Lord your God, it's already not speaking of God in the first person. What happened? So in the biblical text, this is a Midrash. The Midrash looks at what it says later on in the biblical text. It says the people told Moses, we can't handle hearing the voice of God. So there's different ways of reading that. The Midrash reads it because of the switch from first person to then second person. They understand that God switched and started telling the rest of the commandments to Moses, and Moses repeated them to the people. So they hear the sound of God talking, but they're not getting that frightful experience. That's an interpretation of 3 or 4 verses that otherwise seem to have elements that are missing in this story without getting into too much analysis. For example, it says in one text, and Moses brought back the words of the people to God, but it doesn't say what the people had said. So this interpretation understands that. But even there is a great example. Over there, the first 2 commandments then would be more God. The last 8, let more person. So this idea of a partnership is found in every element of Torah. Every element of Torah can be divided into God, humans. Sometimes 90% God, 10% human, sometimes 90% human. When we make up a holiday, when we make up a custom like latkes or donuts, it's not a halacha. It's a way we're celebrating Hanukkah to remember the miracle of the oil. We're creating it. It's 99% us, so to speak. So there is this partnership of custom, of law, of interpretation, of application. This is an element that makes sense, so to speak, of why is it that God made the Torah in this manner. There are many approaches, but this is one of those approaches of the necessity of partnership is encoded into the very fabric of what Torah is supposed to be. Okay, so this was the line we said before. Before learning Torah, we say a blessing, thanking and praising God. If you don't understand the meaning, so then you don't say the bracha. If it's the oral tradition, you do say it if it's written Torah. Why? Because written Torah is Torah, even if you don't understand it. Oral Torah is not Torah if you don't understand it. It's nothing. Because the whole point of Torah is conveying the ideas. So the mitzvah is fulfilled. Now, a matter of fact, in your morning blessings, you're going to see two different blessings. One is Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, which is said also when you read the Torah. That's for the written Torah. And then you have Asher Kiddush, there's a few different versions of this, but Asher Kiddishanu b'misosav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah, on words of Torah. And then we also say, God, make the teachings of your Torah sweet in our mouth, the mouth of our children. That is related to the oral tradition. So if in your morning prayers, you're going to, after reading those two blessings, you're going to read a selection from the written Torah and the oral Torah in order to do both, because both are considered to be our Torah. There's a famous story with a convert, potential convert, who comes to Shammai and says, Shammai, convert me, but I only want to accept one of the Torahs, the written Torah. I do not want to accept the oral Torah. Shammai chased him out. He went to Hillel, says, convert me on condition that I only accept the written, not the oral Torah. Hillel says, come, let's learn. And begins to study with them. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav. And the alphabet, that's how you have to start. You got to start learning Hebrew. He didn't teach him the Bible in Aramaic or in Greek. He's teaching him in Hebrew. But he teaches him the alphabet. The next day when he comes back, he tells it to him backwards. Kaf, Shin, Reish, Kuf. The guy says, but yesterday you told me the alphabet was Alpha, Beta, Aleph, Bet, and now you're telling me it's Zeta, whatever. So Hillel said, if you trusted me for the alphabet, you're going to have to trust me for the oral Torah too. Even how to read the Hebrew, you need to have someone teaching you. There has to be a tradition, whether it's a culture or whatever. The same thing with the oral tradition. But this idea that there are two Torahs is integral to Jewish life. This idea. Now, one of them is a closed canon, the Tanakh. The other is an open canon, the oral Torah. But even that open canon has works that are closed. The Talmud is closed at a certain point. The Mishnah is closed at a certain point. The Midrashim are closed at a certain point. So they do close, and we interpret them, and we expand on them, and expound upon them. But still, the potential for ever growing Torah is always there. There's always room for growth. There may be different levels of authority. Who accepted everything makes a big difference, because communal acceptance of a text makes a big difference. Rashi ends up, he's a medieval commentator, he ends up being the preeminent commentary on Chumash because he was accepted. What I mean to say is, can you objectively give me the reasons why Rashi is more popular than his grandchildren or many other great commentators? Maybe you can't. The fact is, it was accepted across the board, and that ends up giving it an extra level of legitimacy in the discourse. Not necessarily binding, because it's not halacha, it's not law, but there is an element of reverence given to a text that was accepted by all of Israel for a long time. That's just a, so to speak, a heads up. So Tanakh does contain all genres of Torah as a seed. The written Torah is a source code for all the multiple categories found in the oral Torah. So we'll be tracing these teachings back to the sources in the written Torah. So Midrash, lesson 2. Let's turn to lesson 2, which is, now in this lesson, the structure is to both analyze the legal Midrash and the non-legal Agadic Midrash. We're not going to do that. We're only going to do the Agadic Midrash. The Agadic Midrash has many different types of learning. So is it a particular set of books, or is it a certain style of teaching? So we know already, because I let you all know, it's both. It's both a certain style of teaching and also sets of books. The word Midrash means to seek out, to explore. And like we said a moment ago, as just like the entire human being is encoded in a strand of DNA, so too a midrashic teaching expounds on the layers of meaning encoded in every verse of the written Torah, but not necessarily in context. This is the difference between what we call pshat, the simple surface meaning, which is not always simple and surface, but that is in context. Midrash, much of the time, will take out of context and compare verses, and that will help give a greater, deeper understanding of central ideas. Now, the Midrash does have within it many biblical explanations and interpretations that you and I could say, wow, that's a very straightforward interpretation that resolves conflict, contradiction. So the Midrash has both in it. But we're going to look at a few different types in a moment. We will see the different types of Midrash. Okay, so here we have that timeline, too small on the screen. I know that. Okay, so if you take a look at the Midrashic works, so we have halachic Midrashim above and Agadic Midrashim at the bottom line. Agadic are the stories and non-legal, and the legal, which are the halachic, are above. So I just want to say, there is a fascinating debate that does exist in traditional Judaism about what degree of interpretations were transmitted. How top heavy or how bottom heavy is what we call the oral tradition. In other words, the Mishnah, which is 6 orders, 60 tractates, is said without recourse to biblical quotes and sources. It is said law with debate. It says different opinions, but it's a collection of law without proving where these things come from. Halachic Midrash will go through the Torah, all the halachic sections, and derive laws from the biblical text. The big debate is how much is being derived and how much is just being linked, like a mnemonic device. So, for example, one reading is like this: the oral Torah is the body of literature God conveys to Moses over 40 years, and then he writes the cliff notes for it called the Chumash. The 5 books of Moses, according to this reading, are the cliff notes of the oral Torah. What's the important thing? The oral Torah. The written Torah is just so you should be able to link it and not forget it. That's one approach. Each of these approaches are not necessarily going to be completely acceptable to everybody, which is why there's been debate about it. And what the challenge is that you'll find in different sources, you'll find sometimes it seems as if we're just looking for an allusion in the text for it. For example, don't mix milk and meat together. Don't cook it together. Don't eat it together. And don't get pleasure from it is seen as being a biblical doraisa, meat that has like a cow and a goat, not chicken. We'll leave chicken out. Goat and cow that have babies. You are not allowed to take a piece of meat from any kosher cow or goat and mix it with any milk of any cow or goat. You're not allowed to cook it. Sorry, the 3 permissions: cooking, eating, having pleasure. In the Talmud, when they discuss it, they find many different sources for it. There's a debate. Where do you derive that from? But it's not really a derivation if everyone agrees to the end result that we don't eat it, we don't have pleasure from it, and we don't cook it. In other words, in that case, it says 3 times the Torah, don't cook a goat in its mother's milk. And the goat is just the normative form of what they would do in the lands of that time. So it uses that. But really, it's about don't have milk and meat cooked together and don't sell it. The point is, if you look at the Talmudic debate, no one says maybe it's not forbidden, but other things they do. Meat and milk, they're working with an assumption. And we argue about anything that's possible to argue about. In other words, this is a big deal. In other words, there is text that you're deriving law from, or are you linking law to text? The Mishnah does not link it to text at all. It just tells you at what time do you start saying Shema in the evening. It doesn't say, it says in the Torah, when you lie down and when you wake up. It doesn't say that. It starts out with the law. It tells you law. The halachic Midrash starts off with a biblical verse and then says what each word means, what the repetition is. So if you want to link your oral Torah to the written Torah, that's halachic Midrash. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Was the Mishnah first or do the rabbis create the bulk of what we call oral Torah? We understand the rabbis have a right to. They have when I say the right, the courts, the Sanhedrin has a right to from the biblical text. The question is, as laws develop, what percentage? And it's a fascinating conversation. I personally am fascinated by this, and it's another whole class to view how different people viewed it and its relevance to modern day discussion about when people began to push back and try to get rid of Talmud, Midrash, tradition, halachic tradition for thousands of years. So one of the first targets that took place in the early Enlightenment, pre-reform and conservative, in that period where it begins, this is a discussion about, okay, how much of the oral Torah, Talmud, Mishnah is binding on us? This was the question. And then, so some people rejected it all. So we're going to go back to prophetic Judaism. And others said, no, we're going to pick out the things that we believe are really from the Torah oral tradition. So all becomes down to part of the conversation, part of the debate is about the early debate. Now people, it's so far gone in the shadows of history, people don't even realize that this debate was what part of the intellectual debate. Many people were leaving Judaism because they could. The ghetto walls had crumbled. But the intellectual debate of justifying or explaining different approaches to Torah were very much based on debates about the Midrash, where it came from, the Talmud, etc. So, but going back to this core idea, so halachic Midrash is derived from the text or linked to the text. Agadic Midrash tells you stories and messages and morals and ethics also linked to the text. Yes, Mayor.
Messianic era.
Yes.
Halachic?
So the basic understanding is the Torah will never be exchanged. There'll always be a Torah, and the laws will always exist. You may not feel at a certain point that there are laws you're told what to do. They might be natural, but the Torah can never be abrogated because God himself says that in the Torah, which is one of the big issues. Okay, without getting to other religions, they would claim the Torah ended because you entered a Messianic age. We don't have that. Okay, two categories of Midrash. We have the
The question was, is the Messianic age, is it a halachic midrash or is it?
the idea that there is a Messiah is seen as being part of halacha, part of Jewish law. There are fundamental beliefs, and this becomes a problem because Judaism is mostly a religion of behavior, not a religion of faith. In general, we don't have catechism. We don't have a mantra of what a Jew has to believe. Maimonides created one, but in the Talmud, and the understanding of many great sages of his time was you have to believe the whole Torah. What are you talking about? There's no part of Torah that is not equally from the word of God. So what do you mean you believe one over the other? And the Messianic age is, the whole prophets are full of Messianic age. If you read the prophets and you believe it's part of Tanakh, Mashiach is all over the place. You can find in Deuteronomy as well. God says you'll be exiled, you'll return. There's enough not just allusions, texts that talk about exile and redemption in the 5 books. But forget about the prophets. The wolf will lie with the lamb. All this stuff is understood. The debate in Jewish law would be, like Maimonides would say, well, maybe the wolf will lie with the lamb is a metaphor for nations that are carnivorous and attacking others will lie down in peace with peaceful nations. But everyone believes in traditional Judaism that there is a Messiah and a Messianic age, and one is obligated to believe in it, despite the fact that, like I said, there is debate about creating a catechism in Judaism, a list of things that one says, I believe, because the whole Torah one has to believe. And a matter of fact, Maimonides says you also have to, everyone is obligated to believe as well in his reading of the oral tradition that's transmitted, the part of it that's transmitted about what an esrog is. You can't say, I think an esrog is a watermelon. I think tefillin is not that. In other words, because you could reinterpret it any way you want. So he sees that as being integral to belief in the Torah, for example. Okay, halachic medrash derives mitzvot from the Torah. Agadic midrashim are moral, philosophical, mystical teachings, as well as stories, parables, and narratives. Types of midrash. You have legal exposition, historical narrative, moral, ethical, philosophical, parable, Torah commentary, and even life of the sages. We have in this book, there's going to be extra ones that you could look on at your own that will have some examples of the non-legal at the end. Okay, so the term Midrash is applied to teachings quoted by the sages of the Mishnah and Talmudic period, 100 BC to 500 CE. We do not call Midrash, make your own Midrash, dance Midrash, meditation, Buddhist Midrash is not Midrash. It may be drash. I may be saying a drasha, which is a sermon. I might be getting creative interpretation. It's not Midrash. Midrash becomes a body of work. In other words, you could call it that, but the technical term is this idea. Okay. So again, it's a small, I know this one is small, but this has the major Midrashic works. But you have it in your textbook, and you could see that as well, the major works, that some of them show up a little bit later when they get actually collated and put together. But the primary is all the sages from the year 100 to 500. Okay, let's leave the timeline for a minute. Okay. So for the first 1,200 years following Revelation of Sinai, it's oral. Then it was during the Mishnaic era that the oral Torah's documentation begins. Why? We're going to discuss next week. So the teachings of the sages after the compilation of the Talmud do not carry the same authority. Again, we'll discuss this. In other words, there is something called the close of the Talmud, when everybody, so to speak, it becomes the accepted document of Jews in Israel and Babylon and Egypt. This is accepted as being the body of literature that is binding. Now, it's not a book of law. There are many debates in the Talmud, but anyone after the year 500, 600 who wants to argue a debate for the next 2,000 years, they went back to those texts. They did not make up their own interpretations. Nobody today, from that time on, nobody made up their own halachic medrash. No one goes to the biblical text and says, I'm going to interpret the aleph to mean this, the vav to mean this. Rabbis for the last 1,500 years do not go back to the biblical text to derive law. Everything that was to be derived is now through the lens of Mishnah and Talmud. The biblical text is no longer that repository. If it was going to be said, it was said. That part, the principles. That is how Jews have been learning Jewish law from that. We have not been recreating from the Torah new law. We have been recreating new insights, relevance, interpretations of stories, but not new law. New law builds on this idea of consensus and precedent that exists by accepting of certain works, and also a deliberate limitation on applying the 13 principles. Let's take a look at the 13 principles. Take a look at 58. Pinchas, you just read, right? Susan, when you read on page 58, text 1.
Midrash means to seek out and to expound.
Read the reading, text 1.
Reading, I'm sorry.
Right below it, it says text 1, exploding particles.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Same page.
My words are like fire, says God, like a hammer that shatters a rock. As the hammer explodes many particles, so does one verse of scripture explode into many meanings.
So either it means like a rock goes off, or sparks that fly from an anvil or from a rock when you hit it right. In other words, the idea is there's not one truth, multiplicity of truths when it comes to insights and inspiration and ways of looking at things. Although we do have the idea of follow the majority when it comes to law, like we saw before. So we have here on figure 2.1 on page 60, different types of halachic medrash. You could all read this on your own. So I'm just giving you that to you so you get an idea. Then you have the major midrashic works from 62 through 63. Now we're going to look at a parable. A parable, there are stories in Midrash. So we're going to look at a few of these story elements. So Mayor, on page 64, iron and the trees.
When iron was created, you trembled. Said iron to them, why are you trembling? If no tree among you enters into me to provide a handle for my blade, not a single one of you will be there.
What do you think that means, Mayor? What does that mean?
Don't be afraid of me until I start to use some of you.
Right. How would you express that today? Or anyway, how would you express that? In other words, who's the greatest danger to the Jewish people? Other Jews. It says the tree says, ow, you're biting into me, or you're gonna bite into me. And the axe says to the tree, there's another version of the same folk wisdom. The axe says to the tree, I wouldn't be able to chop you down if you didn't give me a handle. The apostates of the Jewish people were the ones that went and promoted the enemies of the Jews to go and attack them and to debate with them. It was in civil war that people went and became, went to the other side, became collaborators, traitors. Who do we have to worry about, so to speak? In other words, if you don't give the wood to the head, it won't be able to harm you. So this is now, this could have been folk wisdom from outside as well. Once it comes into the system, though, it takes on extra meaning as it's applied to different cases, but it is included in the Midrash. So it is these are stories that are a general wisdom type of story, like Proverbs, but what do you think the benefit of a parable? What does a parable do more than?
It illustrates a complex point clearly.
Right, correct. And it also, right, and in addition, the parable has this life of its own as well, where you're going to remember it. If I just said, there's more than poetry. Poetry, I need interpretation of the words, right? The parable is a simple story that's enjoyable and it's evocative. And it's like, wow, if I wasn't my own worst enemy, I'd be okay. Why am I giving the axe? Why am I buying beer if I'm an alcoholic? Why am I going to the casino to take my friend there if I'm not going to gamble? What am I doing? Why am I providing the very fuel that's going to consume me, so to speak? So all these ideas, the story itself has like a life of its own, a message about it can later on be unpacked as well. So here's a Maimonides. This is an important thing, Maimonides. This is text maybe a little bit difficult to read, so I'm going to paraphrase it. So Midrashic literature contains stories, narratives, parables. So the iron and the trees. So why use a parable? It makes the topic relatable. Sometimes it's too complex for conventional language. So parables do help. Okay, so here's Maimonides, and I will paraphrase. You don't have to read this. Now, as far as the binding nature of Agada, of Midrash, there are things there that are strange sometimes. There are things on the fringes. Sometimes they said things in order to what's called break the ear or bend the ear. There's two words. Lishber ozen. In other words, to make a person pay attention. People are falling asleep, right? Everyone's falling asleep in the middle of class. And Reb Meir says, I think it's Reb Meir, says, why did Esther get 127 countries in the story of Purim, in the Megillah? And they all wake up. And he says, because Sarah lived for 127 years. And in merit of that, Esther got 127 kingdoms. Okay, cute, nice. What was his point? Just wake him up? So some say, no, wait. If Esther gets a country for each year of her life, that means for each day, you get a city. For each hour you're behaving correctly, you get a neighborhood. For each minute you're learning Torah, you get a street with houses. So wake up, kids. What are you sleeping for? In other words, a midrash, a parable, can sometimes seem strange. And sometimes we may not seem to have an interpretation. So some rabbi said, look, if you don't get it, so you don't have to accept it. You don't have to take it and you don't have to beat your head over it. The main thing is the law of Torah. These things are the extra, the spice of wisdom. But there's really not so simple in the Talmud. Another story is told. A rabbi who was an expert in both, not all rabbis were experts both in halachic interpretation of the law and the agadic, which is the inspirational. Some were great, wise, deep thinkers, and others were great spiritual awakeners. One rabbi had both qualities. So one student says to him, Rabbi, teach me some law. And the other one says, Rabbi, tell me some of your spiritual inspiration. Wake me up, lift me up. And they wouldn't stop, each one pushing. He says, you remind me of a story of a man who had two wives. He was a little bit older in years, and the young wife kept plucking out his white hair from his head. And his older wife kept plucking out his black hairs because she wanted him to look like, her age. He ended up bald. Stop nudging. He didn't say stop nudging. He said, I'll give you one that works for both. But this idea of Midrash being something that some people really want to hear and others want to hear the law. And it's seen as both have a value and that each one, to leave one without the other, so to speak, is not who we truly are. You need to have the law and the spirit. If you divorce the spirit from the law, you do have a dry law. You read Psalms, you read the Navi, you see it's not just law. Even the Chumash itself is full of narrative too. But the whole prophets are full of beautiful poetry and spirit. King David says about the laws in the writings, oh, I live for this. This is sweeter than honeycomb, more precious than gold is your teaching, your law. We love the law, but together with the law is the spirit, which is halacha and agadah, law and the spiritual, mystical inspiration stuff. We need to have both, so to speak. One other quick story. We'll do the story. Let's read Maimonides. Maimonides says there are three types of readers. One group of people take everything literally. They read a Midrash about the tree saying the axe, you're hurting me. They think the tree has consciousness and awareness. The rabbi said it must be true. Others say, I also take the rabbis literally, but if they're saying such foolishness, then there must be fools. I don't accept them because they reject anything they don't like. So this is a very large group, Maimonides says. They think they're smarter than the sages, and the sages are simpletons, primitives, not realizing the depth of metaphor and of meaning that is buried in many of these seemingly simple stories. So Maimonides says a small group, it's so few in number, I can't even call it a group. It's a handful. They understand. The sages are very wise. And they know what is possible and impossible. When the sages speak of an impossible vision of an animal, of a ship flying, these are metaphors for things. They understand that, and they understand the sages are not idiots, they're not simple, and they look, and the words have both an obvious and a hidden meaning. So whenever sages speak of things that seem impossible, so they're employing the style of riddle and parable with truly great thinkers. Because in order to be able to bring home things that are a little more subtle, at times you have to give examples. You can see this today when people are trying to describe the newest advances in science. People have to give examples to make it tangible. Some of the things are very far out if it's just strings of numbers or even the concepts as they are. All the popular books today that want to convey the newest studies of human behavior are going to give examples and stories that will then reveal some technical element in the human condition. The sages are doing this as well. Okay, so on the other hand, Mayor, you just read Mayor? No. Okay, Pinchas, would you read text number 3 on page 65?
65?
65 in the text number 3.
Most of the esoteric wisdom of the Torah is hidden in the Agadot in the book Ein Yaakov.
So according to the first Chabad Rebbe, if you want to find allusions to all the mystical secrets, read the stories of the sages. They're not just morals and ethics and spirituality. They are allusions to mystical ideas as well. The secrets of the Torah are hidden there. In other words, and we're going to give an example here of a deeper meaning of one. Take a look here at this next one. I'm going to read this one. The Battle of the Angels. This way I can make sure everyone hears here, just because it's the last one. I want to be able to make sure we get it. So the Battle of the Angels. This is text number 4 on page 66. One of the great questions of the Torah. The great question, when I say great, I mean problematic verses of the Torah that cry out, interpret me. It is written, God said, let us make man. Top of page 66. Let us make man. Who is he talking to? As a matter of fact, the Midrash even says in another place, Moshe says to God Almighty, the heretics, the idol worshipers are going to use this. So God says, I'm not going to change my Torah for every idiot. You want me to get rid of the sun because people are worshiping the sun? I should get rid of the moon? Let those who want to err. Those who want to make a mistake will make a mistake, but this is the way I want to say it. So the question is, what does he mean? Is it the royal we? Is he talking to all of creation saying we're going to create a hybrid of man and angel? Of animal and angel, of materialism and spirituality? Is that what he's doing? There's another interpretation. He's talking to the angels. That he's saying to the angels, because respectful, even if you're the boss and you have the right to make the last decision, he's teaching us derech eretz. He's teaching us, what's he doing? Why is he putting in this verse? To teach us a ethical behavior, that when you have subordinates, you should not just go and impose your view, even if you've already made your decision. Ask them, engage them, invite them in a non-condescending manner. If you could pull that off, maybe make a poll on Twitter. I don't know. But the point is, what we're saying here is, that's one. There's another interpretation. Here it goes. Said Rabbi Shimon, when God came to create the first human being, the ministering angels formed different factions, different parties. Some of them said human beings should not be created. While others said the human beings should be created. Thus it is written, kindness and truth encountered each other, righteousness and peace abutted. This is a verse. What does it mean? Kindness says, the angels represent different spiritual realities. This is an important thing to realize. Whenever angels argue in Midrash, how could they argue? They're just doing God's will. But there is a true perspective that is real from a high spiritual source that may conflict with another high spiritual value. In other words, the angels will debate about conflicting godly, holy values. And here we see it. Kindness says, create them. Human beings do kindness. Truth says, do not create them. They're full of lies. Righteousness said, create them. They do acts of righteousness. Peace said, do not create them. They're full of quarrels. So we have peace and truth are fighting against our existence. Kindness and righteousness is fighting for our existence. Whether these are angels or divine attributes, here it seems to be they're almost divine attributes, not just the angels. God's kindness is, so to speak, arguing with his righteousness. So kindness is saying, create them. Truth is saying, hey, they're full of lies. Okay, what did God do? He took truth and hurled it to the earth. Thus it is written in Daniel, so taking it all the way out of context, you cast truth to the ground. So the ministry angels to God, master of the world, why do you insult your signet? Your signet ring is truth. You are truth. That's what you seal everything with. Hashem emes. That's what God is. That's how we conclude the Shema. So God says, my truth rises from the earth. Thus it is written, truth sprouts forth from the earth. So I'm going to go to a newer interpretation of this, the Rebbe gave. So we're going to just take a look, in other words, how a modern day, if you will, classical Midrash. So if we go to the end of this class, we're not doing the halachic Midrash. Okay, so, all right, so here goes the issue. Text them on page 77, text 12. So the biblical text does not have vowels or punctuation. So if you see the panda eats, shoots, and leaves, I should have it here. Okay, on the screen it shows up. Eat, shoots, and leaves is classical punctuation problem. Punctuation saves lives. There's all sorts of elements like that we have. It depends where you put the punctuation, exact same words, right? So we're going to say every word of the Torah, I'm going to cover this up here. Every word of Torah can be read and understood in multiple ways, has additional meanings of text. So why are there no vowels or punctuation marks in the Torah scroll? In order to be able to have an additional reading. Of course, you have to read it correctly. And if you read it the wrong way in the synagogue, they're going to shout at you. They're going to correct you. You can't get away with it. But there are many verses that have a dual meaning that can be read with a different punctuation. So if you take a look, it's in Psalm, text 13, page 79. So, no, because the punctuation was transmitted, it was never a doubt. It was transmitted from Moses. In other words, it was these people they were reading it from the beginning. As long as if you were reading it every day, there had to be punctuation. The Jews were reading the Torah publicly, the 5 books of Moses, publicly from the time of Moses. That is the tradition. Now, for sure, the men of the Great Assembly do finish off the prophets. So that's 2,500 years ago, not 3,300 years ago. But it's not written down as a text. This is the issue with last week we spoke about. Last week, we spoke about when was there a codex that was with punctuation, with notes for the scribe and the reader. But they always had a traditional reading that existed, and people wrote down notes for themselves as well. So this is a debate. You have certain traditions that go back to the earliest time. Some say it goes back to Ezra, where you have, I'm saying this is even from the academic perspective, that different biblical verses are written a certain way but pronounced a different way, called Kri and Ksiv. So some say that was one of those meanings that were encoded in the text from the beginning, that you're visualizing one word, but you're reading a slightly different punctuation. But this is something else. This is saying you read it and pronounce it the correct way, but there's another layer of how you could read the exact same text. So here is a text. May he dwell forever before God. Kindness and truth shall be summoned to guard him. The simple meaning, Yeshev olam lefnei Elokim, Chesed ve'emes man yinsruhu. So the simple meaning of the text is, let's take a look here on this. I can't make it bigger. I'm sorry, so look closer to the screen. So the word olam in the biblical text usually means forever. So there's an alternative way of reading it. Instead of translating, may he dwell forever, and that it's summoned to guard him, it could be maybe settle the world. The question, who will keep it? I'm going to explain it in a moment. You'll see this. It's going to read as a different translation. Translation A reads like this. It's on the screen. May he forever dwell before God, kindness and truth summoned to guard him. Alternative translation. May the world be settled before God. Who will keep kindness and truth? Okay, so take a look at text 15 on page 81. This is the Midrash taking alternative reading of the text. Said King David to the Almighty, Master of the world, may the world be settled before God. Why don't you balance your world and make equal the rich and the poor? Equal financial, what do you call it again? Status. Why are the poor? Why are the rich? Enough, God. Why do you have to make a world where it's not fair? Some people are the 1%ers, and some people are poverty-stricken. An age-old question. So they read the text as saying, replied God, if such were the case, who will practice kindness and truth? If all were rich or all were poor, how would there be an opportunity for human kindness? In other words, this changes our whole approach to the poor. The poor, it's not just that they didn't do anything wrong. It's not just that we have an obligation to take care of them. The whole reason they're there is that I should be able to help them. It's like the famous joke where the guy comes to it's in Fiddler on the Roof, and it's in other older sources. A man comes to the rich man and says, rich man, can I have my donation that you always give me? And the guy says, I'm sorry, muckle, business is bad. He says, why should I suffer? Because your business is bad. And this is true. In other words, the whole reason God made poor people is that rich people should be able to help, and everyone's rich in some way. We all have something the other doesn't have. So why did God make a world of inequality? So you could be godlike. So what happened? They took a concept and they read it into this text as being a debate that all of us have. All of us have this question. It's not fair. Why is the world this way? The haves and the have-nots. We want to make, equal income distribution or whatever we want to fix the world with. And many people want to try it. And what we're saying here is the fact that it's there, it's the rich person's fault. What does that mean? Not fault, merit. Here's the last idea, the Rebbe's reading of it. Let me get the Rebbe's reading of it. Hold on, here we go. Okay, take a look at the Rebbe's reading, which is Truth from the Earth. And we'll close with this. Although I'm going to drop over my time, I'll just close with this. He goes like this. Page 82, text 16. The attribute of truth, which is the truth. Let me stop sharing so that everyone can see. Okay. The attribute of truth, which is the truth of God as it relates to the spiritual process of creation, is limited if it only manifests itself where the divine truth is recognized. God has an attribute of truth. God's attribute of truth is found in the world where divine truth is seen. If people are acting in a way of criminal behavior, lying, corruption, God's divine truth is not revealed. It's hidden, it's concealed. So because the material world is a place of falsehood, truth does not prevail here. The things that are valuable to society are not always truly valuable. The things that the world says is important is not necessarily the hierarchy of importance. Our world is not a world of truth necessarily. It's called the world of falsehood. So because the material place of falsehood, a place where divine truth is not recognized, truth says, I can't be fully expressed in the world. You're going to put me in a world where people cheat and steal and rob, and the divine truth is not recognized. What do you mean? The truth that God sustains and takes care of every one of us, and that every moment of life has purpose and meaning. The truth that everything that happens is for the good. All that is not clear to humanity. It's not clear. Truth says, hey, don't bring me down here. I can't be myself in a world of darkness and concealment where the wicked prosper. It's not good for truth. But if we remember, we learned in the earlier course, there's God's attributes, and then there's the way God is himself. So the quintessential truth of God, as God is, above attributes, it's not constrained in any way. God is not limited by being less present in the world because there are bad people or corrupt people. God is everywhere, no matter what. God's in the worst possible place just as equally as he is in the best place. God is everywhere. God fills all space. So from God's point of view, he says, it's not limited to place where divine truth is recognized. So therefore, here goes the key idea. Even a person's mundane household affairs, which you're doing just for your own materialistic purposes. You want to earn a living. You want to eat, you want to drink, you want to feed your family. It's not about any higher purpose, which seems to be not about a higher truth. And if it's not about a higher truth, then it's a lie. So seemingly, they seem to have no connection with the truth of God. But nevertheless, they're also bound to the divine reality. This expresses itself when the person, despite the fact they experience only the materialistic nature of these pursuits, utilizes them for goodness and holiness. In other words, I might be earning a living and eating and drinking for myself, but if I use that energy to do something good, from God's perspective, the lie part doesn't matter. Goodness and kindness trumps truth. In the sense here, not of lying being okay, a recognition of the flaws of our universe, and nevertheless, in our world where kindness prevails, that is a place where we allow God to be found and felt and expressed, even if it seems like I might be doing things for my own reasons. Maybe I'm giving charity, it makes me feel good. Maybe I'm working hard because I want to have a good life. But if I take that money and help others, automatically the lies have become goodness, have become a place where God is revealed. Maybe not truth with a capital T, because not everyone sees it. I don't always feel it. I might think I'm running to earn a living because I want to earn a living. But if I use that for something good, automatically I've been aligned with the ultimate truth, which is the truth of God. All right, this is just a show of a Hasidic interpretation to a Midrash, which that Midrash explained another Midrash. If you remember, the first Midrash said God throws truth down to the ground. The second idea, because he wants to make a world of kindness. The second interpretation of King David says, God Almighty, why don't you make the world of equality? And God says, who would do kindness then? This is part and parcel of the whole deal. And the Rebbe says, it's true that truth won't always be found in a place of kindness, but that doesn't matter. Do what's good and right, even if you don't feel like it. It's an expression of the ultimate truth. And not just that, even in retrospect, you did it, maybe you did it all for selfish reasons, but then you went and used it for something good that retroactively reveals the truth of God, not just the truth of God as an attribute, but God as God is, where God is found in all places. So anyway, this is like a take on that you could take from a Midrash and expound it through the generations and as it developed. There are many more wonderful readings of stories and interpretations in the back of the textbook. Next week, we will explore the halachic Midrash, and the Mishnah and the Talmud. So we're going to cover those 700 years in 90 minutes. But be that what it may, if anyone has any questions, feel free to, yes.